You know, when you walk through a museum and you look at an ancient artifact, there is almost always that little white placard sitting right next to it.
Oh, yeah, usually printed in a very, authoritative, crisp font.
Right, exactly. And you look at that date and you just accept it. I mean, it feels settled, it feels almost geological to us, like a law of physics or something.
Yeah, really does.
We just assume the people who printed the placard have it all, completely figured out. We trust that a massive amount of definitive science went into that one specific number.
Well, it's incredibly comforting, isn't it, to think history is just that tidy, that someone else has already done all the hard math for us.
It is, but then you realize that sometimes those dates aren't actually based on a carbon test or like a definitive king's seal. Sometimes they are based on a long, long chain of inherited assumptions.
Right, which is a very different thing entirely.
Exactly. And if you nudge that date just a little bit, the entire meaning of the artifact changes right before your eyes. It stops being this curious antique and suddenly becomes an active, live piece of evidence from a crime scene.
That is honestly the perfect way to frame what we are looking at today. I mean, we are talking about taking something very familiar and slightly shifting the frame of reference.
And that ends up changing the entire picture for you.
Completely changes it.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to completely rethink how we read one of the most influential text collections in human history.
We've got a really fascinating one today.
We really do. We are unpacking a 2026 paper by Mark Mountjoy, and it's titled Why the New Testament Epistles Belong Closer to the Jewish War. It was published by True Christian Press.
Yeah, and this paper really shakes things up.
It does. And whether you are a theological scholar, a history buff, or you're just insanely curious, you have probably seen the dates printed at the front of a study Bible.
The ones that feel geological, like
Mhm.
you said.
Right, exactly. But what if those inherited timelines have, accidentally turned the New Testament writers into mistaken alarmists?
That is the core tension driving this whole paper. Because for the last century or so, mainstream scholarship has looked at these ancient letters, which are mostly dated to the 8050s, and they've seen a huge glaring problem.
Right.
The writers just keep saying things like, the end is at hand. But, if they're writing decades before any actual societal collapse, they look objectively wrong.
Okay, let's unpack this because Mountjoy points out a really critical issue with how we read these texts today.
He really does.
When the apostles write things like, the time is short, or the end of all things is at hand, our traditional early dating forces modern readers to do some serious mental gymnastics.
Yeah, some heavy lifting for sure.
Because if they wrote that in, say, 8052, and nothing catastrophic happened for another 20 years, we either have to treat their panic as just a nice devotional metaphor,
Like, hey, life is short. Make sure you're being a good person.
right, or worse, we have to view them as a friend group that made a failed doomsday prediction.
Exactly. The traditional timeline completely severs the language of these texts from any real historical event on the ground.
Which makes them really hard to take seriously.
Right. But Mountjoy's thesis is incredibly elegant here.
Yeah.
What if we don't change the meaning of the words, but instead we just change the date on the placard?
Shift the whole timeline.
Yes. If we relocate these 21 epistles so they sit much closer to the Jewish War, which broke out around AD 66 to 70, the whole landscape shifts.
Oh, wow. So we don't have to explain away the urgency anymore.
Not at all.
The apocalyptic language stops being this embarrassing puzzle that theologians have to manage. It suddenly becomes accurate, real-time historical reporting.
Precisely. These were people watching their nation break apart,
Okay.
and they were writing about what they could literally see out their windows.
That gives me chills, honestly. But before we can analyze what these letters actually say, we have to establish when they were written.
Right, the foundation.
If we are throwing out the traditional study Bible dates, which were mostly built on assumptions about Paul's early missionary travels, how do we lock down a new timeline? We need a concrete historical window.
Yeah, we can't just invent a new date out of thin air because we like the way it sounds.
Right, that's not how history works.
No, it's not. So Mountjoy builds this new historical window using three very specific fixed anchors. These are data points that give us a rigid time frame to work within.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first anchor is the book of Acts.
Okay, so the historical narrative of the early church.
Exactly. Acts ends its narrative abruptly around late AD 61 or early 62.
Okay.
And what is the status quo at the very end of that book?
Hmm?
Well, Paul is under house arrest in Rome, awaiting trial.
Right.
James, who is the leader of the church in Jerusalem, is still alive. and a Roman governor named Porcius Festus is governing Judea.
Okay, got it.
Crucially, though, there is absolutely no mention of the Jewish war breaking out yet. So that gives us the opening of our window.
So Acts gives us our starting point. But to close that window, we need a hard stop. Is there a documented, undeniable historical event that caps this timeline?
There is, and it's a pretty grim one, actually. The second anchor is the death of James.
Oh, okay.
And we have external, secular, historical confirmation from the Roman Jewish historian Josephus for this event.
So it's not just an internal church document.
Exactly. Josephus records that the high priest in Jerusalem, a guy named Ananus, took advantage of a sudden power vacuum.
What caused the vacuum?
Well, the Roman governor we just mentioned, Festus, had died, and his replacement, the new governor Albinus, hadn't arrived in Judea yet.
Oh, so there's no Roman oversight for a minute.
Right, and during that brief gap, Annas convened a council and had James executed.
Wow. And because we have Roman and Jewish historical records of exactly when those governors transitioned, we can pin that down to a very specific date.
We can. It strictly pins James's death to Passover in the month of Nisan, AD 62.
Wait, Nisan, just to clarify for those of us who aren't historians, that's a month on the ancient Hebrew calendar, right?
Yeah, it roughly corresponds to March or April in our modern calendar.
Okay, got it.
So, because James dies in Nisan of AD 62, the book of James, the epistle in the New Testament bearing his name, must predate that exact moment.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, it is the one document in Mountjoy's survey that is written just before this historical window fully closes in on the war.
Okay, so we have the opening of the window with Acts and a firm cap on James's life in early 62. Where does the third anchor fit in?
Well, the third anchor is probably the most famous piece of apocalyptic literature in the world, the book of Revelation.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mountjoy places the writing of Revelation right in this pocket, late AD 61 or early AD 62.
Based on what?
His argument here is that the trajectory of the judgments in Revelation, specifically the sequence of the seals and the trumpets, maps perfectly onto the escalating disorder that happened at the end of that new Governor Albinus's corrupt tenure.
I'm still a bit skeptical, though. Playing devil's advocate for you listening at home. How do we know this isn't just taking isolated historical events and retrofitting them to match the text?
It's a fair question.
I mean, it's like finding a cryptic, undated diary entry that says, the coincidence.
That is exactly the right question to ask. Because if you just take a vague phrase like things are getting bad, you could apply that to almost any decade in human history.
Right, history is full of bad things happening.
Exactly. But Mountjoy isn't looking at vague generalities. He's looking at specific mechanisms.
Like what?
For instance, in Revelation, the opening of the seals describes specific types of economic inflation and famine. A quart of wheat for a denarius, which was an astronomical price back then.
Okay, so it's very specific data.
Right. Mountjoy argues this isn't a metaphor for future spiritual starvation. It perfectly mirrors the documented, hyper-specific economic destabilization and corrupt taxation policies that Albinus implemented.
Which we know about from other sources.
Yes, which Josephus wrote about extensively. Revelation chapter 6 describes the opening of the first seal as a beginning, an event about to happen, rather than something already underway.
Okay, so there's a specific mechanical link between the text and the politics of that exact moment.
Yes. And beyond that, if we were talking about one isolated verse or one vague diary entry, you would be absolutely right to call it a coincidence.
Right.
A single verse forced into a theory proves very little. But we aren't looking at one diary entry. We are looking at 21 different letters.
Wow, 21.
Written by different authors to different communities across the Mediterranean, all converging on the exact same historical horizon.
That's hard to ignore.
It is. When you have 21 separate documents all pointing to the same imminent societal collapse, that stops being coincidence. That is a highly corroborated pattern.
Okay, so the historical window is officially... Because when you place these texts inside that window, the vocabulary shifts entirely. It stops sounding like abstract theology and starts sounding like, well, a live emergency broadcast.
What's fascinating here is the sheer precision of the grammar. Mountjoy dives deep into the specific Greek vocabulary of 1st and 2nd Peter to show this.
Give us an example.
Let's look at 1 Peter 4.7. The English translation usually reads, "The end of all things is at hand."
Okay, sounds pretty standard.
But Peter uses a very specific Greek verb there, engizu. And more importantly, he uses it in the perfect tense.
Now, for those of us who haven't sat in a grammar class recently, what does the perfect tense actually do in Greek?
Good question. In Greek grammar, the perfect tense signals a state that has already been achieved and is continuing into the present.
Oh, so it doesn't mean the end will eventually come someday in the distant future.
Not at all. It means the end has arrived and it is actively here right now. It is a current, ongoing reality for them.
That completely changes the tone.
It does. And this is reinforced in Second Peter, where the author talks about his own impending death. He knows he is going to die soon, and he uses a very rare Greek word, tachinen, which means swift or soon.
Swift in the sense of time, right?
Yeah.
Not just that it will happen suddenly when it happens.
His own rapidly approaching death and the approaching destruction of the false teachers infiltrating the church.
Wow.
He legally binds those two events to the exact same temporal horizon. He expects the societal destruction to arrive on the same calendar as his own death.
That completely shatters the idea that he's talking about an event thousands of years in the future. He's saying, I am going to die soon, and this society is going to burn soon.
Precisely.
Which actually brings us to the actual sound of that destruction.
Yes, 2 Peter 3.0. This is one of the most vivid descriptions in the entire text. Peter says the heavens will pass away with a great noise.
Wait, great noise. I mean, that just sounds like a loud thunderclap or a bang in English. Is there something deeper in the original text?
Much deeper. The Greek word he chooses is rhizodon.
Rhizodon.
Yeah, and it is a word found nowhere else in the entire New Testament. It is onomatopoeic, meaning the word itself is built to imitate the sound it is describing.
Oh, like buzz or sizzle or hiss.
Exactly. He pairs it with technical verbs for elements dissolving and melting under extreme heat. It's literally the vocabulary of a metalsmith or a chemist.
That's like a writer today shifting from poetic, spiritual prose to describing the exact chemical smell of burning electrical wiring.
Yeah.
Rhizodon is the first century equivalent of high-def sound design in a disaster movie. It's visceral. You can hear it.
He is not reaching for stock apocalyptic furniture to decorate a sermon here. He's using technical care to describe an event he expects his readers to recognize as already beginning to sound and smell and feel real.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Does this intense language actually match documented historical events on the ground?
Let's see.
Because it's one thing to say things are burning, but can we cross-reference that with secular history?
We absolutely can, and with surprising accuracy. Let's look at the book of Hebrews.
Okay.
Hebrews 10.34 mentions believers joyfully accepting the plundering of their goods.
Right. And traditionally, when you read that in a study Bible, you just assume it means vague religious persecution. Like maybe the local magistrate confiscated their house because they wouldn't pray to Caesar.
Yeah, it's treated as a generic trial of faith, just part of being a believer back then.
Exactly.
But if we place Hebrews in our 80s-60s window,
Okay, what was going on in the 60s?
during this exact window, the civil order in Judea was breaking down, and a rebel leader named Simon Bar Jora was rising to power.
And he wasn't just a random bandit, right? He was running a highly organized campaign.
Yes, he was actually mimicking King David's ancient rise to power. Just like David, Simon gathered a massive militia of the discontented and the indebted.
Building a real army.
Exactly. And as he moved through the hill country of Judea and down into Judea, which is the region just to the south of Judea, he didn't just casually rob people. He systematically seized grain stores and private property across entire towns and villages.
Well, because he had to feed a rebel army that was swelling into the tens of thousands, I mean, the logistics of that alone would be staggering.
It was a massive logistical operation. So when Hebrews talks about the plundering of their goods, it isn't talking about vague religious persecution at all.
No.
It is a highly specific complaint about a documented paramilitary wealth seizure that was devastating the region at that exact moment.
So the readers of Hebrews had likely endured Simon Bar Jora's forces systematically stripping their towns of food and property to feed his troops.
Exactly right.
Wow, that makes the text feel so three-dimensional. It's not a generic spiritual trial, it's a...
Absolutely. Jude issues this fierce warning about dangerous people who, quote, crept in unawares and were sitting right there at their community meals, their love feasts.
Now, could Jude just be dealing with annoying, freeloading house guests? You know, the people who show up to the potluck, eat all the food, cause some theological drama, and overstay their welcome?
It's a funny image, but no, the language Jude uses is far too severe for a bad house guest. Well, the Greek verb for crept in unawares implies ever. That is the language of a community fighting for its literal survival, not managing an administrative nuisance.
Oh, wow. So this isn't a bad potluck guest. This is a Trojan horse situation. Who are these people slipping in the side door?
If we look at Josephus again, this perfectly matches the documented tactics of the Zealot Sicarii.
The Sakai.
Yes, it's the extremist assassins of the Jewish war. Their entire strategy was based on covert infiltration. They would enter towns and even the temple in Jerusalem by exploiting local hospitality and kinship networks.
Oh, man.
They would sit at your table, eat your food, and act like friendly travelers.
And then once they were inside the community,
They would reveal their violent ideological allegiances. And often, by the time they were exposed, it was too late.
so Jude isn't writing a theological textbook about how to politely disagree with other Christians.
Not at all. He is writing an urgent manual on how to survive a documented wave of violent ideological infiltration that was tearing towns apart from the inside out.
Okay, if the historical correlations are this precise, if we have the exact grammar of imminent crisis, the specific wealth seizures of Simon Bar-Giora, the covert infiltration of the Sicarii, why has mainstream scholarship historically struggled so much to accept this?
It's a great question.
I mean, why resist the idea that these texts were written right on the edge of the Jewish war?
This raises an important question because the resistance is palpable in the academic literature.
Yeah.
Mountjoy points to a fascinating case study in David Horrell's widely used commentary on the Epistles of Peter and Jude.
Okay, let's look at that.
Horrell's a brilliant scholar, but his commentary shows the incredible strain of trying to maintain the traditional timeline.
Yeah, Mountjoy highlights how Horrell basically contradicts himself across the commentary,
He
right?
does. When Horrell is analyzing 1 Peter, he admits the text sounds like the end is surely near,
Yeah.
that it is a firm promise of immediate action. But just 60 pages later, when looking at Jude, Horrell claims the nearness is a fading memory from an earlier generation.
We go from it's happening right now to Grandpa used to think it was happening.
Exactly. And it gets worse. By the time Horrell gets to 2 Peter, he actually quotes the theologian Ernst Käsemann, suggesting that because the text's timeline is so awkward for modern readers, we should basically just refrain from talking about the timing of the end at all.
Wait, a scholar of the text is saying, let's just ignore what the text says about time.
Essentially, yes, because an inherited tradition, that geological placard in the museum we talked about, has made them treat a unified chronological claim as a theological embarrassment.
Oh, I see.
If you assume the authors are writing decades early, their urgency makes them look foolish. So scholars have to keep finding new ground to stand on, page by page, to explain the urgency away.
So what does this all mean? If we stop explaining it away, how does this redating reshape our understanding of the whole New Testament?
This is where we had a massive paradigm shift regarding something scholars call synoptic priority.
Okay, before we go deeper, for those of us who aren't biblical scholars, what exactly does synoptic mean in this context?
The synoptic gospels are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They are called synoptic because they share a very similar view and structure of Jesus' life.
As opposed to the Gospel of John.
Right, which is structurally very different and written much later. Mountjoy points out that if the epistles are all clustered tightly around the AD 60s, right before the Jewish war, then the Gospel of John almost certainly wasn't written yet.
Okay.
The early church only had those synoptic gospels.
Why does that shift everything?
For a long time, secular historians have looked at highly developed theological passages in the epistles, like the famous Carmen Christi in Philippians chapter 2.
Which is that beautiful, complex hymn about Christ emptying himself.
Exactly. And scholars argue that Paul invented that high theology. The assumption was that Paul wrote his letters very early in the 50s, invented this lofty view of Jesus, and then decades later the gospel writers copied Paul's theology into their narratives.
Oh, so they treat Paul as the originator of the theology.
Yes. But Mountjoy's timeline destroys that argument, because if the epistles are written later, in the 60s, then Paul isn't the originator. As Paul himself says in 1 Corinthians 15, he is passing on what he received.
He's the recipient.
Exactly. The epistles aren't the rough drafts of Christian theology. They are lyrical, urgent compressions of the synoptic stories these communities already possessed.
Wow.
The story of Matthew, Mark, and Luke came first. These letters were written to remind people of that existing story while their world was literally catching fire.
That completely flips the script. By simply shifting the dates of these 21 books to the years leading right up to the Jewish war, we do something incredible.
It really is.
We don't have to apologize for their urgency anymore. We don't have to explain it away as some overly enthusiastic spiritual metaphor. We actually recover the New Testament epistles as a coherent, clear-eyed historical witness of a society unraveling in real time.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and applied in its proper context. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this framework restores the integrity of the authors.
Yeah, it really does.
They weren't frantic doomsday cultists crying wolf for decades. They were lucid, grounded individuals telling the absolute truth about the socio-political collapse they could literally see out their windows.
They weren't wrong about the end of the world. They were exactly right about the end of their world.
Beautifully said.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy thought to chew on. If these ancient letters were actually highly specific survival guides for a first century political and social collapse, um, how should that change the way modern people interact with apocalyptic media today?
Oh, that's a great point.
Are we guilty of taking someone else's ancient emergency broadcast and trying to use it as a modern crystal ball? It really makes you wonder what else we might be misreading just because we haven't questioned the date on the placard.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning those geological assumptions in your own reading, and we'll catch you next time.